Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Each of you cares deeply about our education system and how it impacts our students. And one of the most overlooked parts of education is not in the classroom. It's in the kitchens, and it's school food. Every day at school, there are 30 million kids who eat school lunch in 100,000 cafeterias across our country. That's more than half of the K-12 students in the United States. To put this in perspective, there are 7 times more school cafeterias than there are McDonald's. 15 years ago, I visited my kindergartner's school. She's now 24. And I saw the food that was being served, and it really changed the trajectory of my life. My name is Fleishman, and I'm the CEO of the Chef Ann Foundation. We at the Chef Ann Foundation have been working hard for 16 years to help school food programs replace ultra-processed food with fresh, scratch-made meals. And we've worked with nearly 19,000 schools across the country. And what we understand is that the gap between what kids need and what schools are equipped to provide is really staggering. Today, almost 60% of what kids eat is ultra-processed. And these ultra-processed foods dominate in school food programs. And while researchers and policymakers are still working to establish what the definition is of ultra-processed food, we know that products with additives and synthetics, ingredients such as high fructose corn syrup, and made with food dyes and through industrial techniques are chemically engineered for you to want to eat more of them, are what we are eating. Common examples of what we see as ultra-processed food in schools are things like the pizza, hot dogs, chicken nuggets. And these ultra-processed foods are linked to over 30 chronic conditions. Things like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, anxiety, depression, this is all connected. Eating ultra-processed foods also makes it harder for kids to focus, and it's linked to behavior and academic challenges too. So, given the harms that ultra-processed foods present, you may be asking yourselves, how did we get here? Well, we see it as there's 3 systematic failures that have happened. 1, kitchens aren't equipped to cook real food. 2, the staff, the school food professionals, are underpaid, understaffed, and they're under-resourced. And the last is that the federal reimbursement rate, which is about $4.50, is not keeping up with the cost of food and the cost of labor. So today we're asking a question that really cuts to the heart of all of this. What are healthy kids and healthy planet for our kids worth? What's it worth to us? School food isn't just about lunch, it's a public health investment, it's a workforce development program, it's a climate strategy, and it's a civil rights issue. So to help us answer some of these questions, I'm joined by an amazing group of leaders. First, we have Maya Miller, who represents the essential voice of young people, connecting school food to climate and health and the future students are inheriting. We also have Congressman Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, who brings a policy lens and decades of leadership on building stronger local food systems, anti-hunger initiatives, and child nutrition and food justice initiatives. And on the end is Dr. Norbert Wilson, who's the director of Duke's World Food Policy Center, and he brings expertise in food equity, access, and it's grounded in both research and lived experience. So before we dive into our panel, I'd like to emphasize something that's really fundamental to this conversation, and that's the role that food plays in children's development. The food our children eat throughout their childhood has been proven to deeply influence their lifelong eating habits and their relationship to food. As kids receive an average of half of their daily caloric intake at schools, The schools have become the biggest opportunity to ensure that our kids grow up with eating habits that are supporting lifelong health and success. So we're going to start with Maya today. Maya, you shared with me prior to this in a call that the school meals that you ate were often heat and serve, and that the options that came day after day were kind of not nutritious. How do you think relying on limited number of processed food options affected how you and your fellow students felt and learned at school? And also, how has that shaped the way you think about school food into adulthood?
Yeah, thank you for those questions, Mara. So throughout my K through 12 education, I went to public school, and for a majority of that time, I ate the school lunch. And lunchtime is always a time to look forward to when you're a student because it is a break from classes. You get to talk to your friends without expending that mental energy. But the lunch itself was not really something that students look forward to. Actually, my high school had a social media account that rated the school food, and out of a scale of 10, and the ratings were not great. Like you were saying, they oftentimes had the same heat and serve options like chicken nuggets and pizza. Towards the end of my high school experience, I started thinking about my diet more, and I actually was trying to transition into a more vegetarian diet, and that made it more difficult to eat the options at lunch because typically the vegetarian options that they served were either pizza or prepackaged peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and those aren't really nutritionally sustaining. But I needed to get through the day, and other students did too, so they consumed the food regardless. I did start bringing a lunch to school, but some students don't have that luxury because it takes time and it takes money to pack a lunch. So I do feel like the school food could have been improved for the students' well-being. And in college, actually, I was pretty satisfied by the options that were offered because of the contrast of high school and K through 12 generally to college. They were just healthier plant-based options that I could choose from. And so continuing into adulthood, I continue to take that into consideration, sort of thinking about my K through 12 experience and how the options were limited and highly processed, and trying to incorporate both health and taste into the food that I'm eating. Sometimes that doesn't always work out, but I do try. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I know a lot of the vegetarian offerings in school are they're heavy with cheese, and that is it's interesting how we think about vegetarian choices and how that evolves into adulthood, kind of like how your palate was changing. So it's interesting to hear about that. Thank you, Maya. All right, Congressman, you've been a champion for healthier school meals for decades. We've relied on you on the Capitol for this. And today, according to the U.S. Farm-to-School Census, fewer than 25% of school meals are cooked from scratch. You've often said that lacking access to healthy whole foods is a political problem. And from a policy perspective, how did we get here, and what has policy failed to protect or invest in that allowed scratch cooking to decline in school cafeterias?
Well, thank you, Mara, and thank the panelists, and I want to thank everybody for being here. Look, when we talk about policy, we're usually trying to talk about, what do we need to do to fix a problem? How do we solve an issue? Well, on this, the topic that we're talking about here today, we know what to do. I mean, we don't have to hire 1,000 researchers to tell us that it's important to invest in school meals, not only in school meals, but nutritious school meals. We know that breakfast or that lunch is every bit as important to a child's ability to learn as a textbook or a laptop. So we know that. So then this is about politics. What do we prioritize in terms of where we're going to put our resources and our funding? And I would argue that our priorities are all screwed up right now. We have an administration that's cutting nutrition programs left and right, and we have a Congress with his head up his ass, quite frankly. And we need to address that issue. The bottom line is, as we are meeting here today, you know, a bunch of kids all across the country are getting fed frozen pizza and heavily processed foods in their school breakfasts and their school lunches. We all know that is a bad thing. And we know that it would be better if we could get kids access to locally grown produce, to better quality meals, more nutrition in their meals. We know that would be a benefit. We know that it would be a benefit to be able to have schools, have the infrastructure to have kitchens to be able to prepare these meals at. You know, we know exactly what to do. We want to make sure we have a well-trained workforce, people who are, you know, who want to show up to work to prepare good meals for our kids. We have to pay our cafeteria workers not only a decent wage, but a livable wage. So we know what we need to do. We just need to make sure that the funding is there. And, you know, I was looking at a figure today. As of right now, we have spent $9.5 billion, that's billion with a B, on the current war in Iran. And it just started, $9.5 billion. That's more than USDA spends every year in every school in every state on school breakfasts. And that number is going to skyrocket. Obviously, people in Washington think that that's a priority, and so they're spending their money there. Over half of our discretionary budget goes to the Pentagon. Congress decided that tax cuts for billionaires and multi-millionaires at a cost of trillions of dollars was a good investment, so they ended up passing those tax cuts. But when it comes to school meals, you know, again, we're giving our kids nothing. They're barely able to get the scraps in terms of federal funding, and that has to change. And so that is a political decision. It's a political decision whether to spend money on nutrition or on war. It's a political decision whether to spend money on nutrition or tax cuts for wealthy people. And I would argue we're making the wrong decisions right now at the national level. But it requires that people have to be engaged and to push back and to demand that their elected officials actually reflect the values, I think, of the majority of people in this country. I mean, most parents, I think every parent that I know of, wants to make sure that kids are getting good meals in school. It's not a radical idea. Most parents think that school gardens are a good thing so that our kids can learn how their food is grown and what constitutes good food. Most parents I know think that teaching our young people the ability to cook is a skill that will be with them for the rest of their life. All of these things are important, but I got to tell you, you know, we're getting to the point now where we're getting some people who, you know, haven't been up front on this issue. They're beginning to talk the talk, but we need them to walk the walk. I mean, I don't want to hear any more rhetoric. I don't want to hear any more speeches about the importance of nutrition. I want to see action. I want to see investments. And I'll just say one final thing. If we do these investments right, it'll save us a boatload of money. You know, kids who get good food in school, they learn. You know, kids who, you know, are not food insecure, who are getting good meals on a regular basis, grow up to be healthier adults. You save money in terms of, you know, of health care and a whole bunch of other costs. So, again, my plea is that we need to get our act together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's the lack of long-term thinking is really hard to digest, no pun intended. So, Norbert, we have a question for you. What changes when schools move towards scratch cooking, not just nutritionally, but in terms of things like dignity or cultural relevance, or like a student's sense of belonging, which is really important? Could you speak to that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Myra. Mara, sorry, why did I just mess up your name?
I don't know.
I've known you for too long. But it's such a pleasure to be here. And I want to actually start off in a slightly different way to address this particular issue. I don't know if you were listening to NPR this weekend. They were talking about this issue that's happening right now. It's Ramadan and Lent are overlapping. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was this really fascinating thought that lots of religions around the world use food as a way of actually understanding who we are and our relationship with something beyond ourselves. Food is deeply personal, deeply connected to who we are as people, regardless of a faith tradition or whatever, but lots of folks are moving towards this. I would even argue that when we gather around the table, we're creating community. We're creating identity. How many conversations have I had that taught me who I am and my importance? They happen frequently around the table. I can think of the times with my grandparents or my parents or with cousins. These were opportunities for me to become who I am. There are other places where that happens as well. It's in school. Schools are these sites of cultural production where we sit and learn from each other, where we make connections, where we learn that we matter. Now, let's be clear. I don't think third graders are sitting there thinking through, deep existential questions, but they're making relationships, ones that will build upon and continue to build upon. I have a colleague at Duke, Norman Versba, and he writes on food and faith, and one of the things he talks about is the importance of eating. And one of the things that eating, if we do it correctly, leads us to deeper understandings of who we are and realizing that in order for us to eat, something had to die. And that's not to go morbid, but rather to understand that this is a valuable and critical act. I want to push that further and say it's harder to have those meaningful conversations if what we're looking at is a processed chicken nugget. Because that's such a flattened version of who and what we are. The food should reflect us. I can only imagine what school meals could look like if there were a couple of Nigerian kids and there was jollof rice, and they could talk about what that food meant for them and their families. I'm from South Georgia, and I would love to see on a menu some boiled peanuts. And yes, I said it the way I said it. But the point I'm trying to get at is that food actually tells us who we are and allows for meaningful conversations to take place. It allows us to stretch across our identities. And boy, do we need that nowadays. And so I say all that to say, if we had the opportunity for the kitchen staff, the lunchroom cafeteria workers who are members of our community to actually cook foods that reflect who we are, and not just a monolithic notion of who we are, but who we all are, oh my gosh, I can only imagine what kind of formation could happen at schools. And notice I said formation and not just education. This is a critical space of growth. And food can be a pathway. It could be almost like an icon that connects us to something much bigger than ourselves. Again, you're not going to get that with frozen pizza. You need someone in there who lovingly prepares that meal. And I want to be careful because we undervalue care work all the time. We undervalue the work that women do on a day-to-day basis, and it's not just gendered, but I'm saying it's frequently that way. If we recognize the importance of the work that these individuals are doing for our children, giving them the skills and making sure that they're paid well will allow for them to do that work. We're all contributing to the education of our children, their formation, and it can start with something as simple as a well-cooked meal.
I love that. Thank you. And I feel like one of the things we see at the Chef Ann Foundation as we work with schools across the country is when you start to bring in culturally relevant meals to the community, it engages the kids and the staff. There's a district we work with who wanted to bring in a pozole for their community because they have a lot of Latino kids. And the food service director came up with the recipe and they were testing it, and one of the school food professionals said, this isn't right. This isn't like my grandmother's. This isn't right. Let's redo it. Let's make it. And she had ownership over that recipe, and then the kids also connected with that recipe too. And that was something that they shared, and it's really cool to see that, and I think speaks to what you were saying. I also want to remind folks that if you have questions, please scan the QR code for Slido and put your questions into Slido, so we're going to answer them at the end of the session. Next for you, Maya. Maya, you've shared that you connect school food directly to the future your generation will inherit. Having kids, I can really appreciate that. From your perspective as both a student and as an environmental studies major, how does schools' reliance on ultra-processed food impact sustainability and also waste? And why does it even matter in the long term?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the answer to my previous question that you asked, a lot of times students were dissatisfied by the options that were offered, and that caused students to discard sometimes entire trays of food. And so when that happens, the food ends up in landfills, and that contributes to an accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is contributing to climate change, a problem that we are already trying to tackle. And especially if you have food that is not fit for every student, that is lacking in variety, for instance, dairy milk. If you have a large population of students who are lactose intolerant, then it's not improving their well-being. And then the contribution of waste into landfills doesn't do anything for future generations. In fact, it harms them. And I've been fortunate to have been in programs that really focus on youth as being a solution to these problems, since we are one of the main people that are affected because we would be living with the problems if they were to continue. So programs like the Plant-Powered School Meals Coalition, where we get to talk to policymakers about how we feel about school lunch and how we feel that it is dissatisfactory. Or programs like the New Roots Institute that focuses on student-led community change for ending factory farming. And really, waste is only the last step in the process. In my high school, students and I were noticing that waste was that food was going to waste because students didn't like it, and so we began a composting program to try to divert that waste. But this is a much larger systemic issue. It is the mass production of the same type of crop using intense chemicals that contributes to the development of ultra-processed foods. And so part of the solution would be scratch cooking, where it would minimize the steps from the food being grown to actually getting to the mouths of consumers. And so we definitely need to keep pushing forward with the initiatives that are student-led and also intergenerational, so that we can find the best solutions to these climate issues that we're facing.
Yeah, well said, well said. You know, it's interesting when you go into school food programs because, you know, there's guidance that these school food programs have to adhere to. And there's fruit and veggie guidance, which is great, and that, you know, that came about through legislation. But one thing we notice is that when you give kids choice, you have less waste. So we see a lot of districts packaging up salads, and what we find is that if you put out a salad bar, it's a much better option because kids can go through and they can pick what they want. That choice decreases waste. I know personally, you know, my son only likes the cauliflower and carrots and a little bit of ranch dressing, and if he got a packaged salad, more than half of that would go in the trash. It's an interesting thing to think about. Congressman, School food reform is really noted as a bipartisan issue or a bipartisan solution. One that can really reduce healthcare costs and support farmers and strengthen local economies. You started to speak about this, and also improve childhood well-being. What specific actions can the public take to help accelerate real policy change?
Well, thank you. I'm just kind of imagining Maya as a member of Congress. I think that would be a welcome addition. Look, I think people have to remind themselves and understand that you elect us, that you have power over who represents you at the local, state, and at the federal level. And you have every right in the world to demand that your elected officials reflect your values and your priorities. You know, Maya talked about, you know, the importance of scratch cooking. Well, I mean, that's wonderful, but if you don't have a kitchen at a school and you don't have the infrastructure, you can't do that. You're limited. Well, every school should have that. You know, we talked about the quality of school meals. I have a bill, the Healthy Meals Help Kids Learn Act, which would actually increase the federal reimbursement for school meals, just by a little modest amount. You know, we got 50 co-sponsors, but I don't have a single Republican yet. And I know that a lot of my Republican colleagues share my concern and my commitment to more nutritious food for not only our kids, but for everybody in this country. But, you know, the politics that exist right now, you know, make it difficult for people to go on bills that may add, you know, it may cost a little bit more. But I would argue again, as I said earlier, that investing in better nutrition actually saves you money. And I wish the Congressional Budget Office would recalculate how they calculate how much things cost to take into account, you know, again, you know, how much better workers are who get fed good food, or how much more kids learn and can excel because they have good school meals, how many health care costs are limited because of good nutrition. And you know, when I talk about nutrition and school meals, it's not just only about, you know, making sure kids have good meals so they can be attentive and learn, but we live in a country, the richest country in the history of the world, and we have 46 million Americans who are hungry, who are food insecure, who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. Many of those are kids who go to our schools. This is all they get. My sister teaches school in Worcester, Massachusetts. I mean, kids come to school on Monday, you know, and it takes them half the day after a breakfast and lunch to be able to get them to focus because they haven't eaten all weekend. They've gone without meals. So it makes no sense at all to kind of not take this issue more seriously. Again, if you're a fiscal hawk and you want to control the federal budget, invest in this. Invest in this. Get this right. You know, if you're somebody who believes that we have a moral obligation to make sure that all of our kids, you know, can get a healthy start in life, you know, then you ought to be on board on all of this. But I got to tell you, it is frustrating to me that, you know, that it is so hard to get a majority behind anything to invest more on these matters. And that really has to change. This is so short-sighted. And again, the people who benefit from these school meals are not just kids from low-income families. A lot of kids from middle-income and wealthy families miss their meals, and this is a way for them to be able to focus on their studies and on their education. So I mean, talk to your school boards, talk to your city councils, your mayors, your state legislators. In Massachusetts, we have free universal meals for all of our kids, which is wonderful. Every state should have that, right? You know, you can make a difference at the state level, but on the federal level, demand that we do more. And it has to be more than just, oh, let's eat more nutritiously. Don't be a cheap date when it comes to advocating for a better nutrition for our kids.
Yes. I love that. Well, it's interesting because I was reading a stat this morning that said for every dollar invested in local food, it returns $2 in economic and health benefits. And I think that's...
And we also support our local farmers, which is an important thing to do.
Yeah, and the trickle-down effects, there's so much downstream effect to, beyond the most important thing, which is the health of our, youngest, most vulnerable populations. There's so much downstream effect to it. And I think you're right, though. Parents and advocates have moved this system. There are now eight states that have passed universal free meals. And I've been in this work for 15 years, and we were trying to move that for so long. Now only in the last 5 years, we've seen 8 states pass universal free meals. That's incredible. So definitely use your voice. And I want to use this last question to really talk about the opportunity. I know that there is a lot holding us back at times, but I really want to talk about the opportunities. It's going to be a round robin for you guys, and then we'll take some questions if we have them. So we're going to start with you, Maya, and then we'll move down. But what are you seeing as momentum right now? And what's one example, a policy, a practice, or a community level change that gives you hope that this system can transform?
Right, so I go to school in Philadelphia right now, and I have been fortunate to be able to witness the community gardening and community farming scene there. I mean, people have taken initiative when the system has failed them to really produce food and provide for their community. And I think food that is grown in collaboration with others just has another layer of meaning to it. And one farm that I've been associated with, I'm very inspired by, because they have basically built from the ground up. There used to be abandoned homes on top of where the farm is now, but they basically created a farm from scratch, and it was just a lot of people who cared about their neighbors and cared about people getting fresh produce, and they took initiative to make that happen. And so I think continuing to be in those environments where people are growing food and learning how to, that can be widespread across the country. I also wanted to reference something the Congressman said about school gardens. I've seen that too, and just having students learn about where their food comes from, I think is really important and really inspiring to see.
Thank you, Maya. Congressman?
Look, I've seen some incredible initiatives in Massachusetts and all throughout the country around these issues. The Chef Ann Foundation has done some great stuff with schools on scratch cooking, on training, on helping people understand the importance of nutrition. And we see examples everywhere. I mean, in almost every state, there's some examples that we can point to saying we need to replicate this everywhere. So that's what gives me hope, is that people are catching on. They get it. They understand it. And when parents in particular see these programs kind of spring up and they see the benefit to their kids, they get excited and they become activists. We just need to translate what is happening locally to a national level. And I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter what your party affiliation is or your politics may be. I'm a believer that you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. It is, I've had conversations with people who are much more conservative than I am on a whole range of stuff, but they understand the importance of nutrition. They understand the value of some of these models that we've seen all across the country. We need to replicate them, and let's just be honest. You can't do this nationwide just relying on foundations and the kindness of strangers in your community, right? We need the involvement of the NGOs and of the nonprofit community, but we need a federal commitment. We need a federal commitment to get this right. And if we do it right, again, our kids will benefit. I mean, we will save money. Our farmers will love us even more, and we can move this country in a direction, quite frankly, that truly reflects our values.
Yes, love it. Norbert.
I'm going to make a quick comment, and I know we need to open up for questions. And California has passed a law to move ultra-processed foods out of the school system. And it hasn't been fully implemented. It's in process, and I'm keeping an eye on that because that is a move that's going to have some really important implications.
Yeah, that's AB 1264. Keep your eye on it, and we hope in the saying, as California goes, so goes the nation on that one. Let's hope. Okay, we have some questions and then a closing, and we have some great questions coming out. The first question is about the school meal movement. So it says, can you speak about universal school meal movement and how individual citizens can help move us towards a world without childhood hunger? I'm going to go to you, Congressman, on that one.
Yeah, demand your elected officials at the local, state, and federal level reflect your views and your values. I mean, again, I'm a member of Congress. I'm ashamed that we live in a country where there's 46 million Americans who are hungry or food insecure. And by the way, the face of hunger defies stereotype. I mean, the big percentage of people now enrolling in SNAP are working families, people working full-time. So people working full-time doing everything that they're supposed to do still can't afford to put enough food on the table for their families. And these school meals become even more important because at least they know their kids are going to get these meals 5 days a week. Look, this is a political condition. I mean, we have the money, we know what the hell to do, we have everything, but we lack the political will. And I wish that these questions were being asked in every congressional debate, in every senatorial debate. I wish they were brought up in a presidential debate. You want to run for president? What are you going to do to end hunger in this country? What are you going to do to promote nutrition in this country? And instead, we get asked all these other bullshit questions that don't really matter in our lives. But this does, and this is an economic issue. And this is, again, a budgetary issue. It cuts across everything. And so, look, I mean, people should be impatient, and people should be angry and frustrated with our elected officials for really not taking this on more forcefully. We know what to do. Again, I mean, we're hearing some stuff even out of this current administration about the importance of nutrition. Fabulous, wonderful, okay, all right. But you know what? Nutritious food costs money, right? What are we going to do? What are we going to do to help people? And we just did a farm bill in the Agriculture Committee. I'm on the Ag Committee. The other day, did nothing to address the $200 billion in cuts to SNAP. And if we want to talk about nutritious food, let me tell you, I not only want to make sure people have access to good, locally grown foods, but I don't want chemicals in my food either. And the idea that there's a big wet kiss to the pesticide industry to protect them from any suits or liability, I mean, come on. I mean, maybe we have to follow the money. Maybe that's the reason why we can't get this right. But we got to get it right, and we need more advocacy and more impatience, and it ought to be brought up at every town hall and at every congressional meeting, and and we ought to be pressing the White House to do a hell of a lot more.
I agree, and we have momentum right now. This is a bipartisan issue, so it's now is the time. Norbert, I'd like to go to you with the next question. We haven't talked much about procurement. So how do we transform the procurement system to allow for more inclusive and representative school food systems? Oh, great question. That's the purchasing of food, procurement.
Yeah. I will say this. It can be a real challenge for schools to actually work with farmers and to gain access. Farmers need to be certified to be able to do this. However, I have seen examples. I learned from where I live in Durham, North Carolina, where Durham Public Schools had a program where they were doing and creating opportunities to train farmers, to talk to farmers twice a year about what are the guidelines, what are the rules necessary to get their products into the school system. So I think there's some important ways of training, working with farmers, working with schools, but there's also a practical reality that's important to keep in mind. The production system of farms relative to what schools need at times can not always work well together. So it's about planning, it's about constructing menus that make sense, and I know Chef Ann has worked on this particular issue to make sure that what is served actually makes sense for what's being made available. So it's creating this enabling environment to make sure that kids and the schools can actually manage the foods that can come from farms.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's great. All right, this is going to go out to anyone, so just jump in. So how can schools shift towards healthier meals without increasing the stigma for students who rely on free and reduced lunch programs?
It should be universal for everybody. We shouldn't be differentiating between low-income students and, middle-income students. Everybody should get free. It should be free and universal.
Yep. I think that's it. I think that's about it. Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. So with the dietary guidelines shifting towards more protein and full-fat dairy, how will schools implement these recommendations while addressing childhood obesity?
I see you looking at me, so I guess I'll answer this question.
Yeah.
I think that's going to open up some really interesting opportunities. I will say it that way. If we think about more protein, in the broader sense, you can get protein from a variety of plant-based and animal sources. The challenge, I think, will be making sure that that's something that schools can actually afford. The reimbursement rates aren't super high. So finding high-quality protein at a low cost is a challenge. And so I think that's a critical thing, that if we're going to ask for this, we better find some ways of making sure that's made available. But then thinking about full-fat dairy, and I want to go to Maya's comment about those of us who may be lactose intolerant. Like, how do we make sure that we provide meals and foods that all of us can eat? So,
yeah, it's big. Okay, well, I think that is all we have time for. So I just want to say thank you to our amazing panelists, and I want to thank you guys for coming to listen to this. So when we ask what are healthy kids worth, the real question is whether we're willing to fund school food like the critical infrastructure that it is, because the cost of inaction is already way too high. I think we've heard that today. And the opportunity in front of us is just way too enormous. So thank you for attending, and I hope we can all get out there and advocate. And thanks to our panel.
Thank you.